This podcast is sponsored by Blum. Blum is the leading manufacturer of furniture fittings for high-quality living spaces, dedicated to delivering enhanced user convenience for a better quality of living. Let's talk together about new ideas, because it's not about our ideas, it is about bringing yours to life. Blum, we stay in motion to move ideas forward.
Oliver Heath, the man the design industry cites as responsible for merging nature and plants with mental health and wellness to create one of the industry's hottest topics, biophilia. Who is the man championing the partnership between nature and people and eco-packaging it for use in our homes and workspaces? What qualities and skills does it take to combine and blend the science of nature with the psychology of humans to then create work and living spaces that improve our mental well-being? Let's start to explore and understand Oliver Heath and learn more about how he's using his passion for nature to disrupt and challenge the design industry. So we know each other.
That was a good introduction. Well done.
Well, you're pretty good. You're pretty cool. Now, you haven't aged. I think I met you about 10 years ago. We were working on some property show, which was fun. And fast forward, here we are.
Yeah. I haven't aged, but I am 51 now.
Wow.
So technically I have.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we start, welcome to the podcast, the Designerati podcast. How we typically start is I would invite you to either bring in an object or share some information about you that people typically, our audience, wouldn't typically associate with you.
Ooh, okay. They're like reveal a secret.
Yeah.
Okay. You want a secret?
No one's listening.
Okay. I used to be a fire breather and once set my head on fire whilst fire breathing at an Oxford ball.
Seriously?
Yes, I did. Yes. Yeah, you know, the sort of thing you do. You don't set yourself on fire too many times, I should say, but yeah. Anyway, I had to give it up because of the carbon emissions associated with those great big balls of fire.
And the sustainability.
Yes, it wasn't very sustainable for my hair or the environment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness you're here to tell the tale
I
with a full head of hair. So, Oliver, you have had quite a career. You're an author of multiple books. You work with government. You have a career on television. And now you have your own practice focusing specifically on sustainability and biophilia. Tell me before the podcast, I asked you, is biophilia, is it a noun? Is it an adjective? Tell me about this word.
Okay. And it's really interesting. So basically, biophilia means a love of nature, and it explains humans' innate attraction to nature and natural processes. So in its most basic form, it kind of explains why we're drawn to nature and why, when we're stressed and anxious and tired and we choose to go on holiday, we choose to go to nature to unwind, to decompress, to get back to being at our best. And you know that thing of being in nature and you just like feel the stress wash away and you feel calm and you start to have very different conversations. You feel different. You kind of relate to people differently. You just feel like you're getting back to yourself. And that is that kind of connection to nature. And those benefits that we're seeing there are expressed in this idea of biophilic design, which is how we bring those connections to nature into the spaces where we experience a lot of stress, fatigue, and anxiety. So biophilic design essentially is how we bring that connection to nature into buildings to make them more productive, to kind of actually help deliver on the intended function of the space, but also to reduce negative outcomes produced by stress and fatigue.
It's a fascinating subject and one that's very, very topical, particularly post the pandemic. I'm sure that's had a profound effect, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about Oliver Heath, the fire eater.
Amongst other things,
Where do you come from? Like, what's your background? A little bit about your personality.
Yeah, okay. So I grew up in Brighton, which is a fantastic place to grow up. So I grew up sort of splashing around, playing in the sea, in the countryside, running wild in the countryside. That was kind of really formative stuff. My family are psychotherapists, so I've got sort of strong background in that kind of sort of psychological approach to life, and I guess as a result, spaces. I studied architecture for many years at Oxford Brookes and at UCL, at University College London, at the Bartlett School of Architecture. And then when I left architecture, I was like, do I just want to go and design buildings, or is there more? So I went into set design and exhibition design, and from there kind of launched my own design company back in about 1998, which is when I started working on television. And I started working on Homefront. I won a competition on that. And then from there, switched on to BBC Changing Rooms, if you can remember that, the heady days of
Carol Smiley,
very crazy, flamboyant design things. And then from there, sort of started working in kind of other areas of design. I worked on BBC DIY SOS. I've been working for a number of years in Norway on a television show over there, which has been amazing because the houses are so beautiful over there. And at the same time, running my design practice, which is basically, we've got kind of three key things. So we're basically writers and researchers. So we collate knowledge and data and studies from environmental psychologists. And we write books and white papers on well-being. And we're also a design company. So we translate that research into physical spaces, particularly workplaces and residential spaces. And I also spend a lot of my time giving talks and seminars to architects around the world, teaching them about health and well-being in the built environment, and particularly my favourite subject, which is biophilic design.
So a busy and very, very knowledgeable man.
And I'm a dad as well, yeah. Well, yeah, of course, that's like the other 50% of my life.
How many kids?
I've got two girls.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and a dog. And I've got a little Zevi who's down here.
What is he? Is he a Labradoodle or something?
Zev is a Labradoodle, yeah. And Zev means wolf in Hebrew. So he's kind of derivative of a wolf. He's obviously not very wolfy, actually, but yeah.
I didn't realise. Are you Jewish?
Yeah.
I am as well. I didn't. Shalom. I didn't realise.
Zev.
Wow, beautiful dog. And what have we got here? A picture of...
This is a project we did for the Joy of Plants, the Lehman Lock Hotel. So we kind of filled this room with plants and greenery, trying to look at the ways that you can introduce plants in different ways to support different aspects of the way we live. So how plants can support us when we sleep, when we mix and socialise, and also as we eat in the kitchen spaces. So it was a really nice little kind of very creative visual project. And final pictures of my book, my new book, Design a Healthy Home.
If somebody was to come to your studio, to your interiors practice, would they, do you have kind of like a standard template? Do you have kind of a design that people associate you with?
Well, our approach is biophilic design, and we're
Right.
kind of market leaders in this area, kind of
Yeah.
spending a lot of time researching, writing, designing and talking about it.
Right, so if somebody wants something like we used to do on SOS Changing Rooms or whatever those shows
Yeah.
were called, this is just not going to happen anymore.
Not really doing that, because my work is, what I feel is that the design world's changed, where once it was all about how you express your identity, your sense of kind of style, but maybe your sense of power or wealth or status. Now, that's often how design is used. We use design to tell the world who we are. Now, what we've done is that's kind of what we call an extrinsic message, pushing this sort of thing out, hey, I am this. And you see that idea that, people have got the interior designers in and it's all lavish gold and marble and it's very expensive. Now, we don't really see the value in that because it's all about this outward messaging. What we have done is turn that around and created a more intrinsic approach that said, well, how does this design make you feel? How can it support you in the thing that you're trying to do in that space? Imagine if we designed schools so that children could learn better, hospitals where patients got better faster, workplaces where people could work, could be creative, could mix and mingle, to share ideas. That's the sort of ethos of how we design spaces to do all of those things and not to express messages about that kind of sense of identity. So for me, there's far more value for organizations, and particularly the return on the investment that anybody's making on the designs that we create for them, in creating a space that supports health and well-being, because actually 90% of typical business operating costs are in staff salaries. So why wouldn't you design a space to support them, to make them feel valued, trusted, engaged, to support them in their physical, social and emotional needs throughout the day, to treat them as humans and to respect them.
So it makes complete sense for me that nature, is integral to our well-being. And I'm just interested in this sector, the biophilia sector. Mm-hmm. Is this driven by interiors, the interior sector, Or is this driven by the customers? Is this what the customers actually want now? We actually want nature surrounding us.
Well, we're seeing the need for biophilia and enhanced connection to nature in all sorts of aspects of the built environment, particularly the global environment. You know, it's closely linked to the sustainability movement, where sustainability is often looking at how, you know, if we create a sustainable building, it's how you reduce the impact of that building on the built environment to, you know, reduce the use of resources like gas, water and electricity, to reduce the embedded and in-use carbon footprint. And that's quite a carbon-centred aspect. But then there's also this human-centred aspect that actually we generally design buildings for human occupation, and we spend 90% of our lives indoors. So how do we create spaces that can actually support people, that recognise that they do have physical, mental, emotional, social needs? And how do we actually achieve that? So I think there is a growing movement and awareness that nature plays a fundamental role, both in supporting our sustainable lives on the planet, but also our well-being, because essentially our health and well-being is intrinsically connected to the health and well-being of the nature all around us. So where does that start? Does it start with a plant on a desk? And if you can look after that, then maybe you can look after a balcony full of plants, maybe a garden. Maybe you're going to be thinking a little bit wider and, you know, plant some trees in your local street, or look after a local park, or pick up some litter. You know, and we start to see this sort of growing sort of stepping stone approach of, well, if you care for a plant, then you can care for the wider planetary environment. So we're seeing this as a really important motivational factor for living in a more sustainable, conscious, and hopefully a more regenerative way.
So explain to me about biophilia and the kind of interlacing of the mental health and wellness, please.
Yeah, so there are three core principles to biophilic design. The first is what we call a direct connection to nature. It's how you enhance that connection with natural light, fresh air, water, subtle, gentle movement that we see in nature that we don't tend to find in buildings. Maybe it's about how we see and look onto plants and greenery. The second aspect is what we call an indirect connection to nature. And this is how we evoke a feeling of nature in a building using natural materials, colours, shapes, patterns, textures, and even technologies. And the third one is the human spatial response. It's how we create spaces that are calming, relaxing, and restorative, this idea of sort of prospect refuge theory, but also spaces that are exciting and stimulating. And so all three of these are kind of different ways that we can bring nature in, and there are different ways of using it. One is a neuroscientific approach. So it essentially says, you know, when you're in nature, it makes you feel good. It reduces stress, it aids your recuperation, and it makes you feel good. It puts you at your best. But there's also this other approach, which is what we call socio-psychological, which means that when we have elements of nature in a space, it deepens your experience of that space and the place, but also improves your connection with the people in it. So bringing nature into spaces is good not just for us individually and keeping us at our cognitive best and reducing stress levels, but also good for connecting us to that building, to that place, and the people in it. So it's very good for enhancing a sense of community. And just to sort of explain an example of that, you know, that kind of moment when you're sitting around a campfire and you're looking at the flickering flames and you can feel the warmth and the scent and you can hear the crackling of the logs, and maybe you're having a glass of wine. These sort of rich sensory experience are kind of very powerful, and they actually kind of completely change your physiological state of mind, your psychological state, and you have very different conversations as you gaze into the kind of flickering flames. You feel safe and warm and protected, and it just really opens that up. And those sorts of moments are the sorts of moments that give us the inspiration for how we translate those ideas into the built environment. What would happen if you bottled all that goodwill, all that sort of experience, and brought it into a building, just made people feel happy, safe, calm, relaxed, and nurtured?
Lovely.
And that would, you know, engender quite a different sort of conversation, perhaps a very creative, open and honest conversation, that if you're trying to tackle a real problem or to innovate, probably that's the state of mind you want people to be in, not tense and nervous and stressed.
What a great suggestion. We're going to see in Silicon Valley now. Some campfires in offices with creative teams surrounding a campfire. So can you give some examples of buildings that are doing what you're talking about well, using this three-pronged approach? Yeah,
so there's a really interesting design practice in Singapore called WOHA, W-H-O-A. And they create sort of beautiful, rich biophilic buildings. Singapore is now known as a sort of city in a garden, or city in a park, because they've got a sort of a really strong approach to integrating nature into the built environment, the whole of the urban environment. So we find elements of nature kind of cascading down across facades, green roofs, tiered spaces, pools of water. They've redirected a drainage channel that just took water out of the city into a meandering river, a floodplain, of which is sort of so rich and diverse. They've now, families of otters are living in this space and feeling it, and it's become a tourist attraction. So Woha are really good. There's a fantastic Vietnamese architect called Vo Trong Nghia, Vo Trong Nghia, who creates this beautiful vernacular architecture out of bamboo and local natural materials in Vietnam. Is really worth looking at. There's some great buildings by Thomas Heatherwick, the British designer. He created a really wonderful Maggie Centre. I don't know if you know about the Maggie Centre. They're like cancer care wards where people go to when they're experiencing sort of cancer treatments to go and share experiences with other people. He's created this really beautiful, very organic shaped building with lots of light, a really interesting sort of combination of spaces between sort of public and private areas where you can just sit, quietly reflect, or spaces where you can meet. And it's infused with plants and balconies and light coming in at weird angles. So it feels, in a way, it's not entirely dissimilar to this sort of beautiful crystal. It's lots of little nooks and spaces and transparency, and it's got a very organic sense about it.
It's a fascinating subject, combining psychology with nature, and I wonder how the pandemic has impacted this industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think from my perspective, because we do a lot of work in the workplace design sort of concept and thought leadership in that, we've been looking at this area, and essentially we spent a lot of the last 2 years at home, and I think the kind of net result of that is that we've started to realize that the spaces we surround ourselves in have a very definite impact on our physical and mental well-being. A lot of people have experienced cabin fever because they haven't had the rich diversity of daily experiences of spaces that they previously had. They're not commuting, they're not going to their offices, cafes, restaurants, bars, cinemas, theatres. They're not having any of that. It's just them and the four walls of their home. So they felt a need to reconnect, to support their own physical and mental well-being. And I think there's been an enormous reinterest in gardening, engaging with nature, getting out in nature, walking, hiking. In Brighton, where I live, on a Friday evening, the seafront used to be quite quiet. And now, even through winter, people are swimming, people are walking and running and engaging with that very dynamic natural landscape. So the sort of pandemic has, in a way, sped up that need to reconnect with the natural world that our sort of sustainability requirements have asked us to do. We've realised how important nature is to support us and that we're reliant on it. And I think as we start to move out of the pandemic, we're going to be looking at ways that buildings can support our physical and mental well-being. There's going to be a certain degree of post-traumatic stress. People are going to feel more anxious about going back into bigger groups, so rejoining. So I think biophilic design plays a really important role in creating spaces where people feel welcome, spaces that are clearly flourishing with life.
Can you give examples? How would you, if you were commissioned to make a space feel more welcoming, what would you translate?
Well, we are doing that right now for quite a few interesting organisations, and it is really interesting. So in a way, it's partly about how you connect building to the local landscape. How do you trigger those memories of time spent in nature? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to say, let's create a Mediterranean landscape, because for a majority of people in that space, they won't have been to the Mediterranean. So it's how do you reconnect with a local vernacular form of nature and bring that back in? So think about local plants, local trees, elements of water that will welcome biodiversity back, be that kind of insects and bird life and all sorts of different things like that. And then, how do you kind of continue that sense of nature into a building? Interesting studies have shown that when people use timber in interior spaces, it actually has the ability to reduce heart rates in schools by 8,600 beats per day. So children sitting in classrooms with timber walls have a reduced heart rate. So they feel less stressed, less anxious, and more able to focus on the task at hand. And numerous studies around the world have shown this again and again. The inclusion of natural materials has a palpable difference on people's physiological response to that space, particularly timber. So if you can use local timbers that are reminiscent of sort of local woodlands, then you have that opportunity to reconnect with that kind of past experience that was most likely quite positive. So as we move through spaces, it's not necessarily just about how do we bring plants into space for the sake of it. It's how do we reconnect people with nature to offer them a rich, meaningful engagement with it. And it is all about that meaningful engagement. There's no point having a park with just a track around it and nowhere to stop and sit and watch the ripples on the water or the geese flying by or the gentle movement in the trees. So we need to create these spaces that allow that kind of quality time and experience.
Can you share an example of a fabulous example of a park?
Well, there are, of course, the grand London parks, and those are the kind of ones that people might think. But what I'm really interested in is how we bring nature into cities, into those nature-starved spaces. And there's this really interesting movement called the pocket park movement, which is where sort of forgotten corners of streets or buildings are re-inhabited with tiny little micro parks, and really no bigger than this studio. And they're just spaces with a few plants, a bit of greenery, maybe there's a little allotment space, a space to stop and sit. This is a movement that was started in San Francisco a number of years back, and they started to create, literally what they did is they took parking spaces and they re-inhabited them with micro or pocket parks. And what they found after they'd done a few is they did a study, and what they found that people were actually spending more time in these spaces. They were engaging with other people. The space started to feel much safer because it was occupied. It was perceived to be a higher quality of space. People were stopping, engaging and talking, and they were strengthening the community. So rather than just thinking we have to create grand gestures, these tiny little moments are really important. And I think what's important really for biophilic design is we don't think about it, just at one level. Essentially, we need to think about how we connect with nature across a range of time frames. Every year we might go on one holiday, and that's a really intensive nature experience. But then how do you connect on a monthly basis? Do you get out to a national park? Or on a weekly basis, do you go for a run? What about that daily experience? And then, equally, what constitutes that kind of experience of nature? So what is it that you have on a daily basis that supports your mental and physical well-being, that connection with nature? Is it birdsong? Maybe there's some dewdrops on a web. How do you, because you can design these things in, you can support nature and flora and fauna. So we can design these into the built environment and think about it not just from a city level, but also from a neighborhood, an architectural level, an interior level, even down to the furniture that we create for ourselves and the natural life around us, bird boxes and bat boxes.
So for anybody who's listening to this and thinking, right, how I am interested in bringing nature into my home, can you give some examples of how we can make our homes feel a little bit like we're bringing the outdoors indoors?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first thing I can suggest is is our book.
Design a healthy home.
That's why we wrote the book. So basically, we recognise that health and well-being has been for a long time all about commercial spaces. So if you're employing somebody to be in a building to do a certain thing, you want them to do it to their best ability. So there's a financial incentive for supporting them physically and mentally, if you're an employer. But when it gets to the home, you're not kind of like, there's no return on investment on productivity, So
how do you measure it?
It's difficult to measure things like happiness. So the subject wasn't as developed in our residential spaces. So that's why we wanted to take our learning and experience from commercial buildings like workplaces and education and healthcare and bring all that learning and thought, translate it into the home. So the simplest and most fundamental thing, I guess, is kind of access to natural light. Natural light is really important for our circadian rhythms. And our circadian rhythms are our body's reactions to periods of light and dark across a 24-hour period. It sort of affects our moods, behavior, and our hormone release of melatonin and serotonin, which are our body's sleep-wake hormones. So when we have a balanced circadian rhythm, we feel sleepy at night and we sleep well and we wake up well-rested and energized and relaxed. And then we go and have a really good, energetic, focused day. The problem is that because we have a lot of technology in our lives, we've got electric lights, we've got televisions, laptops, computers, smartphones. Up until the minute we go to bed, many people, are on those electronic devices, and it's the blue light that emanates from those devices that stimulates the brain and makes you think it's the middle of the day, not it's the evening. And so you kind of put your phone down, you're lying there going, I know I'm tired, but I'm really worrying. My mind's buzzing.
So blue light, no good.
Yeah. So firstly, get a good amount of natural light. Get what we call a photon shower, which is an intense burst of natural light for at least an hour a day. And that's very good at resetting your circadian rhythm. Yeah. So then you'll start to kind of feel sleepy at night and alert in the daytime.
Is there any way to bring that into your home if you don't have access to natural light?
So just being conscious of electric light and how you engage with that electric light. And it could be a light bulb, it could be your laptop, your television, your smartphone. Put that down for at least an hour before you go to sleep. Switch your light bulb, your bedside light, to an orange light. There are various kind of brands like Philips Hue make an app controllable light. I've got a Lumi light clock, which basically...
Love.
Do you have one of those?
Yes.
I love my Lumi light clock. It's so good.
Yes.
And basically that allows you to kind of turn this light up and down, and it goes from kind of quite a stimulating blue light to a warm orange light. And it's the warm orange light that reminds us of dusk. And it's that kind of makes us sleep. It removes the stimulating blue spectrum and kind of makes us feel...
And also has noises on it as well.
Yes. So when you wake up in the morning, it wakes you up to kind of gentle
bird
natural
noises.
Sounds or pastoral noises or kind of forest woodland or gentle streams. So it's very, very different to a blaring alarm clock. And it, generally, wakes you up with a kind of color changing light, very, very gentle. And I generally wake up before the alarm kicks in. And the alarm is just sort of bleating sheep and birds in the distance. It's quite sort of magical, really. But it's quite an interesting way that technology is allowing us to reconnect with nature to improve our physiological experiences.
So less blue, more orange.
Yeah. So think about both getting more natural light and also how you connect with artificial light in the home. So that's kind of really important. I guess the second thing is, finding ways of bringing nature into your homes. Plants are these most amazing things that we've really yet to improve with all our technological advances in modern day life. Trees can reduce urban heat island effect in cities. They can reduce the possibility of flooding. They can remove toxins in the air, PM10s and 2.5 from pollution. They can take in CO2, produce oxygen. They create lovely shade. They create sort of desirable spaces. And many plants can do quite similar things of removing toxins, modify temperature, humidity. They add greenery and texture. So, if you're renting a house and you can't paint the walls, what can you do? Well, plants are this kind of very affordable way of bringing pattern and texture and richness into a home that feels very familiar.
Are there any good examples of trees that we can bring into homes? I have a lemon tree.
Yeah, it's difficult to bring trees into home. I mean, things like ficus are quite good, but they obviously do grow. And there are lots of plants. But of course, many of the plants that we have and that we bring in are actually tropical plants. They don't like the kind of variations that we have in our UK climate. So if we bring natural plants from the UK into our homes, they actually want to be cold and hot and have different growing seasons. So the plants that we have, things like those big leafy monsteras like you're seeing there, you normally find them in a rainforest. So they like to be in the warmer situations, not necessarily in direct sunlight because they normally exist on the forest floor. So, slightly away from windows, maybe a metre away, in reasonable levels of light. Lots of plants have been shown by one particular study called the NASA Clean Air Study to remove different toxins. So sort of peace lilies are very good at removing brominated fire retardants and volatile organic compounds. There were kind of all sorts of other mother-in-law's tongue actually produces oxygen at night, removes CO2, so very good for bedrooms. Lavender is very good. It's well known for inducing sleep. So there are different ways of using elements of nature and planting around the home. And of course, in kitchens, you want to have herb gardens.
Lovely.
So bringing in chives and basil and all sorts of other things create a richer, more sensory space that you can also, nicely pick out and throw into your food. So what we try to do in the book is not just say put plants everywhere, but that actually there are different ways of using different plants to support different functionalities in different spaces.
So 1 light, 2 plants.
Well, a 3, it's got to be air quality. This is really important. We're becoming much, much more conscious of air quality, particularly in cities with, cars and pollutants coming into our homes. So thinking about indoor air quality. There are lots of ways that you can do it. Plants will remove some toxins, but actually think about continually ventilating your home is really important. So getting rid of stale air and ventilating out with continuous running fans in bathrooms and kitchens. Anywhere where there's moisture, you've got to be ventilating it. And you also get air purifiers that can remove lots of the toxins. I was working with this company, Blue Air, last year, and they've got this air purifier that tells you when your air quality is getting worse or better. And what was really interesting was as we walked in from, say, being in town, the air quality significantly decreased because of all the pollutants on our clothes. And as we came in, the air purifier kicked in and burst into life because it was trying to remove all those toxins from our clothes.
What's the science behind the air quality then? How does it affect the human?
Well, basically, in our homes, we've brought in all these different things. We've brought in things like volatile organic compounds, which are kind of basically toxins that we find in kind of paints and lots of materials. Formaldehydes are glues that are used to kind of bond together things like chipboard. We've got brominated fire retardants in furniture to stop them catching alight. It's a bit of a throwback from when people used to smoke at home. So we've brought in all these things. Now, individually, they're kind of recognised as sort of safe, but the problem is this sort of cocktail of pollutants that we're bringing in, and all these things, particularly when we bring new furniture, and even when we walk in off the street, we're bringing pollutants in. So just being conscious of that and our susceptibility to poor air quality. You know, obviously we've seen a rise in allergies and asthma and breathing difficulties. Of course, we've all been thinking about this over the last year. So finding ways to improve air quality is really important. And that starts with the reduction of toxins that we're bringing in and asking the right questions of the paints and the materials and the fabrics and surfaces we're bringing into our homes. It's also about ventilating our homes and also about them purifying it. In my house, we have this sort of whole home heat recovery system.
How does that work?
Well, for the geeky ones in there, basically what it does is it removes moist, stale air from kitchens and bathrooms and toilets. And then it takes that away and it extracts the warmth and uses that warmth to preheat fresh air coming in. So there's always air being extracted out, and the warmth of that air is then being pumped back into the house. So it recirculates the heat, but also keeps a continuous sort of supply of fresh air coming in.
And that's scientifically proven to create an optimum space within which to live.
Yeah, and you've got to seal up the house. That's your only form of ventilation. And then you've got these what we call HEPA filters. And basically they're these kind of very thick filters. And when you pull them out after 6 months, they're just black with soot and dust and flies and stuff. And you're like, oh my word, like that is what we would be breathing if we didn't have these filters. And there's two of them and they're both dirty, really black. And I know I live in Brighton. It's not an industrial city. So it's quite shocking, actually, the air quality. We don't really know what it is that we're breathing in. So, you know, air quality is really important.
So for anyone listening to this and thinking, right, okay, I'm passionate about design, I'm qualified in interiors, biophilia is the way forward. What advice would you give to them?
Well, we've actually written an online course on biophilic design in the home. So there's a course that you can buy and kind of learn more about biophilic design. And then we kind of take you through the principles of biophilia and biophilic design, and then how to apply them in the home and train people as designers to think in a more focused way on how the spaces of their home can support their physical and mental well-being, and then apply those, not with any particular fixed style, but take the principles and apply it in your own way.
Mm-hmm. Economically, then, the kind of like elements to create this sustainable lifestyle, to create an environment, you know, surrounded by nature. You know, I've just finished a project on the King's Road, 50,000 square feet. We did have a roof terrace on the penthouse, and we incorporated some green moss area, which was very beautiful. But you know, there's always a conversation about cost, and I wondered, you know, how you would deal with any kind of person that wants an area redeveloped and they're concerned about the costs.
We deal with this all the time, particularly in commercial spaces where you've got cost consultants looking at this going, sorry, you've got how many hundreds of plants? Why are we doing this? Why are we spending the money?
Stream?
Yeah. One of the interesting things about biophilic design is that it's what we call an evidence-based approach. So there's 30 years of research from environmental psychologists that demonstrates very tangible numerical benefits to different spaces by the introduction of nature. So the studies over the years have shown that when elements of nature have been brought into the workplace, productivity can be increased by anywhere between 6 and 15%. Absenteeism can be reduced by 15%. Creativity can be improved. So if you were to sort of look at the metrics, what's really important is that the short-term costs of bringing elements of nature into buildings or the long-term benefits. Now, as I said, 90% of typical operating costs for businesses are in staff. So if you've got people who are kind of coming in not happy and leaving, or not coming in and being absent, or coming in and having this thing presenteeism, which is where they're in, but they're not in a physical or mental state suited to that work, then that building is failing that person and it's failing the business. And so you're going to be losing money. So we always take an evidence-based approach that demonstrates a return on investment. So the numbers that underpin biophilic design, I think, are really important for piquing people's interest and suggesting the potential benefits that different attributes of biophilic design can bring to improving the experience, both from a human level but also a financial level. And I think that's really important, addressing that one aspect.
Very good. So it's science-based.
Absolutely, which is quite different. If you think about all the other design styles throughout history.
Subjective,
it's all just
opinion-based.
like, basically, there's a nice saying, without evidence, you're just another person with an opinion. So think about Le Corbusier, famous French modernist architect. What evidence is there that he created good buildings? None. People just kind of adored him. He was a sort of deity when I was studying architecture. But no evidence to say actually categorically, yes, there's supported functionality, activity, productivity, engagement, creativity. No, it's just like the classic architect that everybody follows. So, think about all the other design styles though. It's just, this is a kind of a revolution in the way we think about the benefits that design can bring our lives.
Who are your peers? Who do you look to for inspiration?
Well, I think there are kind of heroes of biophilic design. Roger Ulrich was one of the founders of biophilic design. Stephen Kellett, who was a sort of psychoanalyst. Edward O. Wilson, who was a kind of sociobiologist. He sadly died about 2 months ago. So these are the godfathers of biophilic design, who kind of were very influential in the kind of instigation of it in the 1980s. So there are, these godfathers of biophilic design, and then there are great architects doing fantastic things, and I mentioned some of them earlier. But then it's also, I think, about human intuition and about just observing how people react to nature. And, just watching people, and I have occasionally these moments where oh, did you see that? Did you see what happened just there?
For example?
Well, that thing when it snows for the first time in a year, and everyone, comes out their house, and the whole world's transformed. It's all white and everything's softened off and it's pristine and it's kind of beautiful and it sounds different and it smells and everything about it is transformed, and you're just looking around and you look down the street and somebody else is doing the same thing. You're like, isn't that beautiful? And it's that sort of shared moment in nature that allows you to speak to somebody. You're both experiencing this wonderful elational moment, a bit like, cherry blossoms on a tree or sitting around a campfire. Kind of transforms people, and it creates this moment of awe that is that kind of shared experience that can connect people through that natural moment. And it's just capturing that moment, go something amazing happens there. How can we capture that, bottle it, and bring it into a building? How can we connect people in that same moment of awe and wonder? What can we do? Let's be creative. And so it's about being an observer, not necessarily being a big mouth. There's lots of big mouths in the world of design, but I think you've got to have your senses open, your ears open and your eyes open, and capture what's going on around you and watch people reacting to nature and find ways of translating that into the built environment. And for me, that's the really exciting sort of light bulb moment.
Hypothetical question. Government give you £1 billion. How are you going to invest it, keeping in line with your values, biophilia, sustainability, and what area would you choose to invest it in?
I think there is enormous inequity for people's connection to the natural world. And I think we've seen that during lockdown in cities like London, where the more well-off people have far greater proximity and access to nature, be that through gardens and the proximity to large London parks, whereas sort of other sort of socio-economic groups, I think racial groups as well, have also really suffered during lockdown. They haven't got, they're living in tighter conditions, poor light, no balconies, no public amenity immediately surrounding spaces, much worse access. So I think it would be about trying to balance up that connection to nature for the people who have less of it, for whom there would be enormous value. So finding ways of integrating nature into the built environment. And that may be about rethinking the cladding of a building, giving people balconies, giving people kind of rooftop terraces, thinking about how the spaces around buildings not only just kind of connect with nature, but give people meaningful experiences that they can sort of start to reconnect. So, whether it's about allotment groups or kind of reconnecting with soil and food, trying to balance up some of that inequity, I think it's probably the most valuable way of spending £1 billion.
Yeah, what a lovely idea. And specifically, your passion would be to introduce that to London.
I think there are many cities where we're experiencing this inequity across our society. And I think, even in Brighton, where I live, there is a recognised number of children who've never seen the sea, and bits of Brighton are only 4 or 5 miles away. So it happens in every city, probably in the UK. So just trying to balance up and recognise that.
Talk to me a little bit about your education department within Oliver Heath Design.
Well, so we're an unusual design company in that we don't just do designs and deliver them to our kind of wealthy clients. It's important to me to take this evidence-based approach to kind of pick up the ideas of some of those godfathers of biophilia design and find ways of developing and enhancing them for the contemporary age. And of course, we've gone through such seismic shifts. There's a lot of changes going on. So we have a research department in my company made up of kind of designers and sort of psychologists and what we do in that is we basically collate knowledge and research from environmental psychologists, and we bring that together to enhance opportunities within biophilic design and think about how they can be applied to different spaces, whether that's workplace or education or residential design. So a lot of it's about kind of just bringing the research that's out there together, thinking about it and making it accessible to people. So on our website, we've got 5 or 6 white papers all about how we can kind of reconnect with nature in the built environment to enhance well-being, but also communities. Think about pre and post occupancy evaluations, and a new one about cognitive and sensory well-being and how we can design to support people with neurodiverse issues, but also recognizing that actually everybody has sort of different sensory experiences of buildings. So lots of knowledge and white papers for people to kind of download for free.
And where can people access these resources?
It's from our website, which is oliverheathdesign.com.
And is that something that we have to pay for? Is that something?
No, those white papers are actually for free. We've been writing with a company called Interface, who are a global flooring company, who have been the most fantastic supporter of our investigations into health and well-being. So they're basically a sustainable leader in kind of manufacturing and material design and supply. And they've been interested in both kind of traditional carbon-centered forms of sustainability, but also this human-centered element. And so I've been giving talks and seminars on their behalf on biophilic design and also producing all these kind of knowledge-based white papers. So it's been like a really fantastic partnership with them.
You have been busy. You have been a very busy
Very busy,
What
yes.
do you want? What do you want your legacy to be?
That we found ways to integrate nature in ways that are beneficial to both people and planet.
Lovely.
Yeah, I guess that's it, really.
All backed by science.
Yeah, well, we've got to take a science-based approach, definitely. I mean, why would you ignore the science? It's not fiction, as some presidents might say.
But it's fascinating.
It's amazing when you unveil it. Yeah.
Because principally, design is historically known as being a subjective area, a personal opinion-based area.
Yeah.
Which is why, some designers, find it difficult to work with clients because, maybe the client doesn't particularly, like how the designer has translated their vision.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that science is actually makes it that much more compelling. It's not just, you that kind of thinks that. It's, here's the research that demonstrates the value of it. And I think, translating it into numbers and the science and the kind of facts and figures is just really important means to kind of demonstrate the value of it.
I mean, you embody kind of your work. You for me, you are an authentic, integrated human who walks their talk. What does a day in the life of Oliver look like? I mean, you just sound so busy.
Yeah, I feel quite busy actually. Yeah, I tend to wake up quite early.
What time?
I don't know, like 6:15 or something. Is that quite early? Some people. It is from the rest of my family. Relatively early, I'm going to say, because they like to sleep in. And I quite like the peace and quiet in the mornings. So I might get up, have breakfast, walk Zev.
What do you eat for breakfast?
Oh, I'm really into gut health, actually. I'm really interested in the kind of gut health and microbiomes. And it's basically...
Mark Hyman? Dr. Mark Hyman?
Oh, okay, I'm going to look him up. Okay, so basically into this idea that we have gut health and basically we have a microflora in our stomach, so our connection with nature doesn't start with a pot plant, it starts with looking after and nurturing the microbiome and microflora in our stomachs. So I think it's really important personally to eat a lot of fruit and a lot of fibre and, eating kind of like natural yogurts, things that will support your microbiome. And that's kind of like...
Probiotics.
Probiotics.
What are you reading to get educated on that?
Basically listening to a few podcasts and different people. I was listening to one the other day, so I just can't remember his name. I'm terrible with names. That's my problem.
But gut flora.
Gut flora is just really, really important. So I kind of always sort of eat, sort of foods that will support your gut flora.
For example?
Yogurts. I think oats, yogurts, nuts, seeds, chia seeds, as I mentioned, kind of probiotic yogurts and milk drinks, fermented foods. Eating a lot of fruit and vegetables is just really important. So, basically being vegetarian, makes that a little bit easier. Try not to eat too many processed foods. So, yeah, keeping that, because I think there is this really interesting emerging idea of the connection between the kind of gut-brain axis and how important your gut is for influencing your physical and mental well-being. And we can design environments to support that.
Well, we say that our psychology affects our physiology. So what we actually think and believe actually affects the way we feel, which is principally what you talk about.
And I think some of that feeling starts within the gut. So, looking after that gut flora, I think, is really important. I think this is a new area that's going to, in the next 10 years, become more and more and more recognised, understood, and more important.
So that's breakfast, then what?
Yeah, so then I sort of probably cycle to work, get to work about at 8 o'clock in the morning and have an hour in work before my staff come in.
So cycling, no driving?
Oh yeah, cycle every day. Yeah, cycle through Brighton. Yeah, exactly. Got to cycle. Brighton's quite hilly, so you get quite a good bit of exercise. And then have an hour before work, before my staff come in, to answer the flood of emails from the day before. And then the staff come in, and basically it'll be like meetings with staff, creative discussions, Zoom calls, answer a few emails, more Zoom calls, and then just kind of like cycle home a bit kind of overwhelmed by the end of the day. Oh, and the other thing we do, which is really important, I forgot to say, we have this thing at work, which is we call the power of soup. And basically every day, what we do is we kind of at about 11 o'clock, we sort of discuss what soup we're going to make, and somebody goes to get the ingredients from a local shop, and we have a soup machine. And then we make fresh soup every day. And it's really, really important for the kind of like the connectivity of our group. So everyone, when the soup is made, we pour it out and everyone sits around the table and we just eat soup every day. So it's a very simple, basic, humanizing, democratic decision-making process. But basically everyone sits around the table and we eat soup. So it's fresh, it's nutritious. And we have conversations about what's going on in people's lives, or about what they're watching or reading, or things that we're doing or should be doing. And it's just this kind of lovely moment where nobody's sitting at their desk and eating. Everyone's eating fresh, healthy food. And we just connect for, 45 minutes every day.
What a lovely initiative.
It's really, really nice. And it's just amazing the ideas that have come from this really simple thing. It means that everybody eats fresh, healthy food for 50p a person. So it's easy enough for me just to kind of pay for people to have lunch, and they don't go out. They kind of but we contain it. We keep some of that sense of social activity and goodwill and ideas as well. So it's a really lovely little thing of just kind of bringing people together.
Tell me about your new projects.
Yeah, so there's a really exciting new project called Planted. And Planted is a new exhibition that looks at how design can support sustainability, well-being and nature in buildings and cities. So we had our first outing this year in London, King's Cross. So we had a bit sort of furniture exhibition, and then we had a speaker programme, and then there were all different sort of little installations dotted around King's Cross.
Where can we find more details? Planted?
Yeah, so go to planted-cities.co.uk.
And this is your initiative?
I'm a kind of an ambassador for them, so I basically run the speaker programme. I've been working with them for about 3 years, because it was supposed to launch before COVID. And we finally got it off the ground. And this year in May, we've actually got a show in Stourhead Gardens with the National Trust. So come to Stourhead and find out more. It's kind of really interesting. It's sort of looking at how design can actually support sustainability and the planet and make people feel better as well. All the important things that design should be doing.
Can I ask you about your home?
Yeah.
You have adopted your principles and translated them into creating an interiors that reflects your values. So
Yeah.
I've seen your walls are covered in wood.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit.
Yeah, so we basically live in a 1960s house that I completely refurbished. So we kind of stripped the house back to its bare bones, insulated the walls, the roof, under the floors, put underfloor heating, put this whole home heat recovery system to filter the air, and then filled the home then with sort of non-toxic, healthy materials. We opened up the windows to the garden, big glass sliding doors, so lots of natural light flooding in. And then we clad the walls in natural timber, because remember, it kind of reduces heart rates and blood pressure levels, and filled it with kind of like safe, kind of recuperative spaces for us to restore, social spaces for us to come together around a dining table, connecting the house to the street. The house has solar panels on it, so not only does it feed energy back to the grid, but also powers our electric car. So basically, our house not only kind of pays us to live there, but it's become more resilient, helps us to be more resilient to the fluctuations of things like energy prices that people are experiencing now, because essentially we get money back from the house. So we're not sort of so at the mercy of these kind of rising energy prices, plus petrol pump prices because we drive an electric car. So the home becomes a model for sort of regenerative living, both for planet and also for us who live in it.
And how do you preserve your well-being?
What do I do? Well, I sort of do a bit of yoga. So I just started Iyengar yoga. I'm also quite a keen runner, so do a lot of running. You take Zev down to the beach. Paddleboarder, so go paddleboarding, swimming in the sea, running up on the downs. Engaging with nature, going camping in the summer, sitting around campfires. All these sort of natural experiences of actually quite simple, cost-effective ways of kind of engaging with nature and having quite mindful experiences. Mindfulness doesn't need to sort of sit in a kind of Zen-like temple. Mindfulness can happen when you're kind of mountain biking down a mountain, with mud flying all around you, and you're just really focusing on being there in the moment, try not to crash into a tree. So I like that idea that mindfulness can happen in quite intense, kind of dynamic moments in nature, and it doesn't just have to be kind of calm, yogic sort of meditational spaces. So engaging with nature in all sorts of ways. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in Brighton as a windsurfing instructor, and so engaging with nature in quite sort of dynamic, active ways was always really important to me.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating experience for me, and thank you so much for
been a pleasure.
Educating me about biophilia. I know your time is so valuable and you're so busy, and we're so grateful at Designerati that you've given us this time.
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you,
Oliver. Amazing, thank you. Now, if you have enjoyed today's podcast, do me a favour. Please like and subscribe. It will mean the world to us. And remember to set a diary note and join me here again next Monday morning for everything designer. We are disrupting and challenging design perspectives. See you next Monday.
This podcast is sponsored by Blum. Blum is the leading manufacturer of furniture fittings for high-quality living spaces, dedicated to delivering enhanced user convenience for a better quality of living. Let's talk together about new ideas, because it's not about our ideas, it is about bringing yours to life. Bloom, we stay in motion to move ideas forward.